Hi, I'm Steve Chambers. I'm an infectious disease physician at Christchurch Hospital, also with a half-time academic appointment at the University of Otago, Christchurch in pathology, which is unusual for a physician. And I first became involved with the early ACID meeting in 1987. I came back to New Zealand from America in 1987 and soon got involved in the national meetings. At that stage they were sponsored by Glaxo, which later became GlaxoSmithKline and other companies. And at that stage Glaxo still had quite a significant involvement in New Zealand, and they were keen to support the meeting. And at that stage it was probably about 20 people held in a small meeting, held in a small hotel. Key members were people like Alice Pegler and Solon Lang, Richard Meach, and who were the first 3 infectious disease physicians in the country. I think I was the 4th. Some medical microbiologists such as Joan Figalli and others would also attend. And Tim Blackmore's dad, who was a vet interested in infectious diseases in animals. So it was a very interesting group, and so we'd meet once a year. This meeting subsequently evolved into ACID. I think I attended my first ACID meeting in Australia in Melbourne, at Lawn. I can't remember the actual date. And it became obvious that linking into the Australian Australasian setup was the way to go, and over time it became formalised as a chapter really of ACID from the Australasian point of view.
So how long have you been working in infectious diseases?
So I started off, I did my elective as a student in Haiti in the Caribbean, which sort of gave me my first little taste of third world medicine, and then Haiti was an extraordinarily poor country, probably with Bangladesh at that stage the poorest country in the world. And then with my time as a junior doctor back in Christchurch, I realised that there were gaps in the knowledge in the infection area, particularly in transplant infections. I remember very vividly the first patient I saw with a mucormycosis, who was a diabetic lady who had a transplant from her mother, and she subsequently died with a horrible infection up through the sinuses, and asking her husband at only a few months to get a post-mortem, which he obliged, and just realising how important expert treatment of infection was and the patient's outcome, particularly in a compromised host. So after that I went to the London School and did a Masters in Medical Microbiology, and then spent some time at Norfolk Park Hospital where the AIDS epidemic was just arriving. We saw the first HIV patient in the UK. And then after that I went to the United States and spent 3 years doing bench research. We were clinical time at the University of Wisconsin. So then I came back to the US, and by that stage the HIV epidemic was in full swing, and people were very glad someone came to look after them.
Yeah, I know. And so it was really those early years that as a house surgeon that had really sort of piqued your interest in the field, or you think you'd always had a lean towards it?
I think it's yes, it's interesting. So I think it's seeing an opportunity or a gap in what I thought was the expertise. There was some fantastically good physicians in cardiology, nephrology, and others. And Ross Bailey, people remember, had a great interest in urinary tract infections, along with Peter Little. And so they provide a model of how you can develop a service or an interest that is based on common things. It doesn't have to be based on exotic things, but doing the common things well is also a really key part of maintaining a good standards for the whole institution. So they were really strong mentors, really.
I mean, one of the things that's always never fails to impress me is the fact that you effectively single-handedly set up the infectious diseases department for Christchurch Hospital, and that's a pretty massive service now. It's but I wonder if you could talk about some of the changes from when you started in those early days, when you started up, to what it is now at Christchurch.
So yes, when I first came back, among the colleagues I interacted with, which made a big difference, was Evan Begg in clinical pharmacology. So we developed some models of in vitro models with dynamic changes in antibiotics, and got some people like Murray Barclay did PhDs with or MDs with us with the bone marrow transplant unit, because when I came back, 50% of haematology patients had invasive aspergillosis, and it became clear that there was a real issue around the hospital. And Mike Beard, our haematologist, was very instrumental, but together we helped control this. And one of the key steps then was building a purpose-built HEPA filtered unit for haematology intensive care. So and that went from a 50%. Can I just check? So it became clear that we had to do something. So yes, we got an expert in from the US, and huge support from the haematology public, members of patients, family members of patients who had gone through the service, and they raised the money, and we built this wonderful purpose-built HEPA filtered unit, and the infection rate dropped from 50% to less than 1% almost overnight. So that was a huge thing. It underlined the importance of good management of the immunocompromised patients. The other thing that happened, I came back as a general physician, and I still remember my first consults from several services, so the service began to build quite quickly, and I found that I was just exhausted from trying to build a new service. And when the opportunity came up to apply for a job at the university, that was very helpful, because it meant I could do less. I could drop the general medicine consulting and concentrate on setting up the infectious disease service, and then also meant I could interact much more with the medical students. And of course, one way of trying to develop service is to make sure young people come through, have a model that they can look at as to how you might function. And when that happens, you start finding you get registrars and people coming through into your service. So that was tremendous. And it was such a joy to see what the young people do. One of my first registrars actually was Sean Remington, who's now a Professor of Immunology in Sydney. And of course there's been many others, all sorts of important jobs, but it's been just such a pleasure to see what people have done. So that was a key step, which meant I could concentrate on the infectious disease side of things. The next, it wasn't until about the year 2000 that Alan Pitty came, and we managed to recruit him from Glasgow. And of course Alan has been an absolute tower of strength and has been chief of medicine for some time now. That meant I had to carry on being clinical director. And then Sarah Metcalf came back from Sheffield, and I can't remember when she came exactly, but then gradually things have been built up, so we now have quite an effective group of people. The other major thing was the development of the home IV service, and I think we're pretty early on doing that. That grew out of the HIV epidemic, because we had patients at home who had CMV retinitis, and we looked to manage them at home. And the best way to do that was to give them IV ganciclovir, because there's no oral formulation available. And so they were the first patients, and then I realised there was a big sort of step to think, well, actually these patients are better off at home. And because I'd been rather protective of them, but some of them told me no in certain terms that that's where they wanted to be, and so that was the way to go. And so we now have a very I think pretty good home IV service run by a clinical nurse specialist, which treats really quite complex patients in the community, I think, quite safely. So that's the other major limb in the service, really.
I mean, I guess you've been so instrumental in the development of the department and many of these programs. This next question is probably might be a little bit hard to answer. I guess, so many different things, but for you personally, what's really stood out as the highlights in your career?
Well, every step that's put another bit of efficiency, another bit of better, improve the service has been. I think the absolute highlights has been the registrars who have come through, who've then gone and practiced elsewhere. And I think, the registrars who we've helped with their training in many consultant jobs in New Zealand, and also other places. And in fact, seeing them come back to New Zealand has been a great pleasure as well. I can't think of many who are practicing elsewhere other than Australia. Actually, to mention it, another highlight was having Tony Walls come back doing paediatric infectious diseases, because previously we used to cover that service, and yeah, it was not something I've been trained in, and it was it was not something I really looked forward to.
Mm.
So having a specialist, paediatric ID person really is another really important. But I think, just to mention again, I mean, the other thing I've really enjoyed has been the interaction with clinical pharmacology with Evan Begg, and now we've got our antimicrobial pharmacist, Sharon Gardner. Her appointment has really added a lot to the department as well, and so I think those are important relationships. I think we're a bit slow in developing our service in intensive care, and that's still really in a relatively early stage of development, and so yeah, it's hard to think of what highlights would be. I mean, obviously, we've published a few papers along the way and had some grants which have led to some interesting observations, but in the end it's people, I think.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. As the departments expanded, I mean, obviously in the early days you were ripped for infectious diseases, and you'd have faced, I guess, the whole breadth of the spectrum of things that can present, but as the department expanded, I guess it was giving you a bit more time to focus on more areas of interest in infectious diseases. What particular areas are you particularly interested in, or would you say you specialise in?
Well, initially I did a lot of HIV work, but it's I think when Alan came, we then had Alan took over a lot of the major development in that area and developed the hepatitis C work. And I think that's been a tremendous success of being an investigation centre for these drugs, and that's developed that service really well. I think over time I developed an interest in fungal infections. That was actually links back to those initial problems we had in the haematology service, and I've been in the ANZMIG for a few years, so that's been important. And currently we've been focusing on. We had a strong relationship with the respiratory department, so we've had a strong focus on pneumonia, which I think the validation of the CURB score was probably one of our most major achievements in that area, and now that's led on to the Legionella work. In fact, David Murdoch did his ND on Legionella with me a long time ago, and he's maintained that interest, and now we've got this national study which is funded by the HRC, which is perhaps a combination of a lot of work in that area. The other areas, staphylococcal disease, I think has become more and more important, is because there's so much staphylococcal disease that we see, and there must be some ways of doing better with that.
And talking about the things that we could be doing better with and things to be looking at, what do you think for New Zealand and I guess Australia as well? What do you think the future of ID and microbe will look like?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because I think undoubtedly we've got to do antimicrobial usage and infection control better, and hopefully we'll have some new initiatives around that shortly. And I think that's got to be not just in the hospital but in the community, and a much better interface with the community around that. I think the clinical microbiologists and infectious disease people, I think, will become more as one. I suspect with the advent of more and more technology in the microbiology area, we may see more responsibility given to non-medically trained people. So the clinical microbiology and ID services may get more amalgamated, and I think there'll be a development in leaving out all the microbiome work on almost interventional microbiology. We've had our first taste of this, first use of this with Clostridium difficile disease and bowel or stool transplants, but there may well be other options that will develop which come out of insights around the microbiome and how we should protect it, how we should use it to inhibit the colonisation with multi-resistant organisms, maybe how we can deal with them. And I guess in my crystal ball I would see that understanding might well develop into a specialty of interventional microbiology or infectious diseases, which is related to the whole microbiome sphere. So those would be some areas. And I think the other area which I think might be a little bit behind that will be our understanding of the microbiome of the animal world and how that interrelates with us. But it'll take a bit of time for that to develop.
You were mentioning the early days of acid, and obviously you've seen acid expand and it really change over the course of the years. What do you think its role in the future will be as well?
Well, that's a good question. In my own personal history, I didn't have much to do with the Australian folks until I came back, and so I had an initial sort of predisposition to looking to the UK and the United States for things. But when I've been back for a bit and got involved with that, I realised actually what a great resource and what tremendous people there were in Australia, who were much closer. So one of the things that's I think is a potential is for the acid to become a mediator of some collaborative trials. I think one of the ones that we're looking for shortly is the piano study, and that may develop some interventional things. And with the personal contacts now with our Australian colleagues, I think it's much easier to develop protocols where we could look at some really changing the face of medicine in Australasia by careful choice of some interventional studies, which I think would be great. I think quite a lot of opportunity for that, and because we meet with our Australian colleagues much more readily, there's no reason why that couldn't work.
Taking a slightly different tack to things, any regrets when you look back over your career?
My career? Well, it's because there's always the odd patient that you wish you'd managed better. I think when I started off, there was no training program in infectious diseases, so I changed as a general physician, and we just put together some things that went along, but through personal contacts, and that was somewhat patchy. I think my major regret is my real lack of sort of not very deep knowledge about study design and associated statistical interpretation. I think we probably need to think about developing that area, that side of things, to make sure we develop the science really well. I've always felt quite comfortable after doing my adventure work in the US with biological systems and bioassays and things like that. But I think my major sort of gap is in that study design statistical area.
Fair enough. And spare time, hobbies, interests?
Oh, well. Well, let me think. I do a bit of swimming and walking. I play the odd game of golf. We have a holiday house, Akara, which I really like going over to. And my wife's in London, so we visit the UK and we do a bit of canal boating over there, which is really nice. I've got my wife's very interested in art and did a masters in fine arts not long ago, so I've had the sort of husband sort of journey along the fine arts track, which is really interesting. And I'm quite interested in ornithology, and I do a bit of member of the New Zealand Society of Ornithological Society, and I do a bit of bird photography, things like that.
Oh, very nice. Now, finally, do you have any special words of advice for trainees?
Find the best supervisor you can get. I think the main thing is to make sure you feel committed. And if you're equivocal about it, it's a difficult, in my opinion, quite a difficult specialty, because the whole added area of microbiology on top of the clinical medicine is another dimension that doesn't exist particularly in other specialties. So it does require a lot of persistence. But on the other hand, the rewards of understanding your interaction with the environment is also great. Yeah.
Grand. Thank you very much for your time, Professor.
Okay.